All right, so we're up to 123 participants now, and it looks like people are still slowly coming in. I think we had maybe 300 people RSVP, so it looks like we're still expecting a couple hundred more people, and it looks like we just got the Facebook live stream started too. So if you're just joining us, we are, oh, it even says webinar is streaming live on Facebook. So if you're just joining, we're going to start in maybe 1 or 2 more minutes. All right, I just verified on Facebook that we are streaming live. We already have a few people watching from Facebook as well. So let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Chris Hinds, and I serve you on Denver City Council. I represent District 10, or as I like to say, Denver's Perfect 10. And I'm so glad that you're here for this conversation tonight about group living. I do want to mention that we're very interested in hearing from you about group living and any topic that you find is important to you or District 10 or Denver. And so we are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram.com, all at Denver Perfect 10. So Facebook.com/Denver Perfect 10, Twitter at Denver Perfect 10, or DenverPerfect10.com. And so hopefully you're tuning in tonight because you want to hear the discussion about group living and the proposal that is currently making its way through the planning process and the official city council process. If you are looking for the discussion about the Broncos, sorry, this isn't it. Or the discussion about the Nuggets, go Nuggets, that's also not this discussion, so sorry for the confusion. But back to group living. So the reason we put this together, we have 2 reasons why we put together this town hall. First, we've heard from a lot of you, a lot of RNOs and residents about expressing some concerns about the group living process and this planning process. And well, we are in crazy times. COVID has hit in the middle of this process. So certainly, there's a lot of interest in the topic, and we want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to hear the proposal and be heard. The second reason why we're having this discussion tonight is before tonight we haven't had a District 10 district-wide discussion, and so I'm grateful for Mr. Webb, Andrew Webb, who's here tonight. For his willingness to present to several groups within District 10, from HOAs to RNOs to other stakeholder groups that are within our district. But we haven't had a district-wide discussion yet so that different neighborhoods can hear from each other. And I think that's important. We've heard from Mr. Webb several times, and we thought we'd change the format a little bit for 2 reasons. First, many of you have already heard his presentation, and there's a chance that hearing from the same person, the same things again, will not provide as much new information as if we change the format. So the second reason is Andrew Webb is a city employee, and so am I. And so sometimes that constrains what we can say. And really, why not hear directly from the residents and key stakeholders in District 10? So maybe they will say some of the same things, but maybe they'll say them in a way that resonates more with some of our participants, the nearly 170 participants that we have so far in this live stream. So besides, not everyone has heard varying viewpoints. So why not get together as neighbors in this virtual setting because of COVID, so that we can have an opportunity to share our thoughts. So we're gonna start off with a brief presentation from Andrew Webb. And by brief, I think normally his presentation is like 30, 40 minutes long. We're thinking like 5 minutes. Yep. And then we'll give 2 different neighborhood organizations 5 minutes each to present their thoughts from an R&O perspective. And then we'll go into 4 different topics. And each of these topics were curated from the hundreds, maybe thousands, but at least hundreds of emails, phone calls, and other constituent interactions that we've had over the last several months. And so we've curated all of those into 4 different discussion topics. And we did our best to find someone who could speak to each topic, who has really studied the proposal. Some of these are R&O leaders, as I said. Some of these are attorneys with land use experience. So probably many of the people who are presenting have read the entire proposal, which, we all have busy lives and not all of us can read the hundreds of pages of every proposal in the city. So we're hoping that this discussion will be a bit of a leg up, so that we don't all have to read every page, but we get facts and we can make decisions based on accurate information. Finally, I want to say we will be giving survey questions throughout the presentation using Zoom, and this is a new thing for us, so hopefully we won't screw it up. But if we do, hopefully we'll have your indulgence and we'll figure it out quickly. But we also intend to, at the end of the presentation, or a few days after the presentation, maybe next week, to send out a follow-up survey that asks other questions about group living and your thoughts about the proposal, and then we'll go from there. So I want to again thank all of you for watching. I want to thank the presenters, the panelists as well. You are so kind to dedicate your time to come before this virtual forum and put yourself on display for all of these these people you can't even see. This is, I guess maybe I've gotten used to it a little bit, but I know that it's certainly nerve-wracking to talk into a camera and just look at the number of participants and think, whew, I don't know where all this is going. But thank you so much for your time, your investment in tonight and in our city. And I finally want to thank our District 10 staff, because this is not easy to do. This is our second large town hall that we've put together, and we've done both in under a week each, and it's a lot of work. So thank you, District 10 team. So with that, let's see. Andrew Webb, are you ready? Are you willing to kick us off? Oh, you've got a screen share too. Awesome.
Absolutely. Are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Great. Well, thank you all very much for having me tonight, and I appreciate the opportunity to give this in a very short format. I am actually also tired of hearing my own voice and looking forward to hearing some other people and their takes on this. So I'm just going to go through just a couple of slides here really fast. This is a proposal that has been, the city has been working on for 2.5 years to update the Denver zoning codes regulations for residential uses, ranging from conventional houses and apartments and condos to residential care uses, congregate type residential uses. And we're doing this for a multitude of reasons. Implementing our adopted plan goals as reflected in Blueprint Denver and the comprehensive plan for equitable and affordable housing for everyone, and addressing problems that have been long known in the Denver zoning code. The code has language that dates back, some of it dates back to the 1940s. It's been amended and added to many times over the years, and as a result, the residential code section is full of outdated or unclear multi-layered language, regulations that exclude populations from certain areas of the city, regulations that prevent the establishment of needed residential care facilities or people from seeking flexible and common housing options. And then finally, many different permitting and notification requirements that have resulted in a lack of clarity and predictability for both neighbors and providers and city leaders. So we want to
yes, Stephen.
pull together that's into one system.
I sent it, yes.
This slide is just a quick summary of what is proposed, and I'm just going to walk through them real fast here. So for residential care uses, we are proposing to consolidate all of the current long list of residential care uses into a single use type, and then regulate those uses by size rather than by population served or the type of housing provided, so that we're not noting certain populations and excluding them from neighborhoods. We would still have the same or carry forward and modify and adapt and modernize some of the existing spacing and density limitations that exist in the code that are aimed at preventing overconcentration of these kind of uses in neighborhoods. And we are also establishing a new upfront community meeting requirement for these larger uses. We know that the current notification requirements, like the zoning permit with informational notice, have been unsatisfactory for both applicants and neighborhoods and neighbors, because they don't give a clear opportunity for people to get to know what is actually proposed and know who the applicants are. And so this new upfront community meeting requirement will provide that opportunity for neighbors to begin a relationship with residential care uses that exist in their neighborhood. We are proposing to update the current regulations for households, which in the current code limit the ability of unrelated people to live together, people to live with roommates in configurations that are common in Denver and cities all over the world. We are proposing to update the regulation to allow more unrelated people to live as a part of a nonprofit housekeeping unit. But while being very clear that rent by the room configurations are only permitted in those zone districts where higher intensity residential uses like apartments and mixed use are allowed. And then finally, we're proposing to consolidate a bunch of non-care related group living uses into a new congregate living category that would provide regulations and use limitations for uses like dormitories, single room occupancy, that sort of thing. Again, those are also types of uses that are not permitted in our lowest intensity residential zone districts, but are in most cases already permitted in higher intensity districts, and that would continue, but this would be a new, more clear area of the code for those uses to exist. As Councilman Hinds mentioned, these proposals are now at the City Council for consideration. They're being considered by the Council's Land Use, Transportation, and Infrastructure Committee. And we've done one presentation to them early this month, and planning to go back here in a couple weeks, and are looking forward to continuing that conversation with Ludi before this moves on to City Council for a final hearing that we expect will occur sometime in the fall, depending on when Ludi decides to move this forward. I just want to highlight here, the project website has a lot more detailed summaries of what is proposed. You can read the actual draft amendments, and you can also sign up for some of the office hours events that we have been arranging on Thursday afternoons and evenings. And you can also are welcome to send feedback to me. We're taking feedback and collecting a record of written feedback for the City Council. Or if you have additional questions that aren't answered tonight, you're welcome to reach out to me. My contact information is right there as well. And with that, I'll hop out of this presentation. I do have additional slides here with more details if people need it, but I'm looking forward to hearing the conversation tonight. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And if you could end sharing, that would be awesome. Great. Okay, so that's a very brief introduction, and thank you also for posting the website. The entire document is available on that website, correct? The entire group living document.
That's correct. So the actual draft amendments can be read there, as well as some longer slide decks that summarize the amendments. And then the staff report that we provided to the planning board is also there and gives a good overview of why we're doing this, how it is consistent with our adopted plan policies, that sort of thing.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next, let's hear from two different District 10 registered neighborhood organizations. And basically the idea is to just get a couple perspectives from around the district. We have Travis Leiker, the president of Capitol Hill United Neighbors, and we have Tricia Schmidt as well. So, but Travis, if you'd give a Chun perspective for the next 5 minutes, that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Sure. And to Councilman Hinds and the D10 team, I greatly appreciate you all putting this together this evening and on such short notice. So great work to your crew. I just wanted to give folks a perspective. I'm Travis Leiker, president of Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods. We represent close to 100,000 residents in the city and county of Denver. Our geographic boundaries are 22nd Avenue to First Avenue, Colorado Boulevard to Broadway. So as I like to say, that within the Chun boundaries, we really have a tale of two cities. Some areas with immense privilege and access to resources, and those who are in deep and trying need. And certainly given those two paradigms, we are focused intensely on putting together solutions that will address Denver's housing woes. And so earlier this year and throughout the last couple of years, we've had representation on the Group Living Advisory Committee. And we've been very pleased with some of the outputs that have resulted from that exhaustive program. Earlier this year, Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods weighed in on this proposal and supported it as an organization. And we're proud of Capitol Hill's rich history of being welcoming and inclusive as an organization and culturally as a community. And this includes providing housing solutions through public policy, issue advocacy, and direct services that results in affordability. And so in August of 2019, Chun reaffirmed our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, including a broad sweeping statement and new policy directives for our organization going forward. And we were purposeful in doing so and identifying and expanding our reach in terms of sexual orientation, gender identity, marital and family status, as well as class or economic background, and certainly housing status. And so as Denver's largest and oldest registered neighborhood organization, we feel it's time to address and correct some of the decades-long discrimination that still exists in our housing and zoning codes. And as such, we believe that the current restrictions limiting people who are not related by blood or marriage is outdated, unnecessarily restrictive, and discriminatory. And we acknowledge that the current zoning code was designed to preserve single-family homeowners and preserve an exclusive class structure that disproportionately affected people of color throughout decades in our city, as well as other historically marginalized communities like the LGBTQ community and certainly seniors. And so while we support an increase to the number of unrelated people allowed to live in, together, excuse me, as the current legal limit of 2 unrelated individuals is a relic of Denver's past, and to this day unnecessarily limits affordable housing options. And so we believe the group living code amendments are much needed update and will assist in creating a more safe, accessible, diverse, and inclusive community. And so we urged City Council and at the time Denver Planning Board to adopt and move this proposal forward. I will say we can't let, when we're crafting public policy in the city, great to be the enemy of good. We feel that the process was exhaustive, robust, and the outreach was inclusive. We had probably 4 or 5 separate occasions in which we've engaged Andrew and his team, as well as the ambassadors we've had from Chun on the committee. Is this entire proposal perfect? Probably not. I would rather, and I think our organization would rather, see us improve the things that need to be improved, fix what can be fixed and modified, rather than scrapping the plan altogether or not moving forward with providing opportunities for inclusive and affordable housing. The discussion with the board was vigorous. And later on, I think we're going to hear a presentation about the American dream. I'd like to talk a little bit more at the micro level with respect to the Denver dream. Many of us on this call and Zoom tonight have been afforded the opportunity to live in a fabulous city. Denver is emerging as a world-class destination for so many across the country and certainly around the globe. And while we had access and received access to this great quality of life, it does not mean that we get to shut the door behind us and say, sorry, you can't have this. What we need to do is make it attainable, make the dream affordable, and be inclusive and supportive of those who are struggling. And we think that this puts us on the path. And again, it's not the panacea to Denver's housing woes, but rather it is an opportunity for us to course correct significantly and move things forward. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Councilman Hinds. And I just want to say again, thank you. And this is why Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods has weighed in pretty vigorously on this discussion.
Thank you so much, Travis and Chun. I would like to now talk or give Tricia Smith an opportunity to say hello, introduce yourself, and talk a bit about thoughts from her RNO. Thank you very much for coming.
Oh, well, thank you, Councilman Hinds, and to your staff as well, and everybody else on this panel. Hello, good evening. I've got lots to say, so I'm going to talk really quickly. Councilman Hinds asked Lou Raiders and I to prepare the summary of specific objections regarding the group living proposal. Please know that we and many others support changes to make Denver a more equitable and inclusive city. Much like the editorial in today's Denver Post written by councilpersons Sawyer and Black, we encourage further consideration of this proposal. The following summary is based on over 4,000 public comments filed with the Planning Board. Almost 88% of those express opposition and concern. Only 4 RNOs have expressed support for this proposal, whereas a total of 32 neighborhood organizations have expressed opposition. Many others have not taken a formal position due to the amendment's complexity and difficulty in reviewing it with residents due to COVID-19. Much of the opposition does support changing the zoning code to provide more flexibility and to support how people want to live today. But this amendment is a 184-page document with complex and impactful zoning changes, and the devil is in the details. So let's get to a summary of specific objections. First objection, the process was not inclusive. Many believe this draft amendment was developed in a silo. There were 48 appointees on the GLAC committee. 35 were representatives of owners and operators of community corrections, sober living, and senior living facilities, and advocacy groups for the homeless and others. Only 8 GLAC appointees were from neighborhood organizations. Second objections, too many people. This proposal allows for 5 to 10 unrelated people with an unlimited number of relatives to live in one residence. With no cap on the number, you could have a house with 30 to 40 or more people living in it. Third objection, this proposal ignores the peer cities study. The Planning Board made a point of studying 38 peer cities. The average number of allowed adults is only 4.4 in all the cities studied. For the Colorado peer cities, the average is only 3.9. Furthermore, there was no evidence presented that the adoption of group living standards increased affordable housing or reduced homelessness in these peer cities, or that such standards would result in an increase in affordable housing and reduce homelessness in Denver. Fourth objection, public health and safety concerns. Many cited the current realities of COVID and overcrowding. Fifth objection, pressure on city infrastructure. The city has not studied nor budgeted the necessary upgrades to infrastructure that increased density proffered by this proposal would require. Everything from trash to traffic, schools, parking, and public transportation would be impacted. And while there are parking requirements in the proposal, there are not enough parking spaces in many of our neighborhoods as it is. Mass transit is lacking, and while we would all prefer a more robust public transportation system, RTD is cutting services. Sixth objection, inadequate enforcement provisions. The proposal now includes a sliding scale based upon square footage. However, without an absolute cap on the total number of people, the proposal violates the planning department's stated position of not using dwelling by square footage as a criteria due to enforcement difficulty and because neighborhood inspection services doesn't like it. A lack of adequate enforcement criteria and verification systems will lead to unintended consequences. The planning board stated that any regulation needs to be clear to administer and enforce, but adequate enforcement provisions do not exist in the current proposal. Enforcement relies upon other building, fire, and housing codes that kick in only when there are a certain number of residents in a unit. However, nobody is required to check or certify as to meeting these standards. Seventh objection, Denver has limited housing stock. There are no provisions regulating against investors from buying up homes for rental purposes. While the proposed text contemplates not-for-profit household, what does that really mean if a landlord can rent out rooms on an individual basis? If the intent is to support more co-housing or co-op options, they should be regulated and licensed as they are in Boulder. Eighth objection, the GLAC is unclear to all stakeholders. Given the complexity of the congregate and residential care facility sections of the proposed amendment, the amount of information summarized in R&O and other presentations was either overwhelming or did not include appropriate explanations as to how neighborhoods would be impacted. Some questioned if most residents, even those in support of the proposal, really understand that a sober living or corrections facility can be built as a use by right without public participation in their neighborhood. Ninth objection, residential care types should not be treated equally. The proposed amendment bundles residential care facilities together, but the objections indicate that there is a huge perceived difference between shelters, assisted living homes, and community correction facilities, and the impact that each would have on a neighborhood. Nothing prohibits someone from assembling lots for a facility that can hold upwards of 40 people or even 100 on a temporary basis. The objections indicate that most residents do not want transitional housing solutions or community corrections in their residential neighborhoods. 10th objection, lack of outreach to people of color. There was not sufficient outreach to neighborhoods with people of color. Many fear that these neighborhoods will be the most adversely impacted by this proposal. Notwithstanding everything I said, many residents do believe solutions are needed in Denver to create a more just and equitable city. For that reason, many residents support the idea of debundling the amendment into its 3 portions so that each might be addressed individually. Many want City Council to not pass this amendment as currently proposed, but rather develop legislation based upon a more inclusive process that addresses all concerns. Thank you, Councilman Hinds and your staff for hosting the event. And finally, thank you to all the residents for taking the time to join this very important discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your comments and your perspective. After hearing both of you, I would say we have at least 100 more people that would back up both of your perspectives. So I want to thank you for being vulnerable and being willing to present in front of a studio audience, so to speak. But I do want to validate. We have heard a lot of people who would resonate definitely with Chun's perspective. We've also heard a lot of people who resonate with the Country Club Historic Neighbors perspective as well. So so thank you again for providing that, voicing those opinions or those perspectives. So the next step I would like to start, I would like to move into the panel discussions and the 4 questions that we curated based on your input. So the questions that we have curated, the first is, how do you think this proposal will impact your American dream? And the reason why we thought this was important, if I could bring my notes closer to the camera so I'm not looking over there, the reason I thought that we thought this was an important, even if general topic, is to cover, a topic to cover is that when before I was elected, I learned that the interplay between land use and transit infrastructure is critical for our city. Land use are the buildings that happen in our city, and the transit infrastructure is how we get to and from those buildings. And with that land use and transit infrastructure, in fact, one of the city council committees is called LUTI, which is land use and transit infrastructure. That's how important those two and the interplay of those two are with our city. But we see that the interplay between land use and transit infrastructure has an impact on different people's perspective of the American dream. So we have two people who would like to have a few minutes from each person, Mary Cuddington and Amy Duclos. So Mary, would you like to start?
Yeah, hi, my name is Mary Coddington. I'm 36. I live in Capitol Hill with my partner, and I'm a graduate student at CU Denver. And I just want to start out by talking a little bit about what I love about our community and our neighborhood. I love the diversity of people. I think we have a wide range of ages, obviously very different income levels. We could use more racial and ethnic diversity, as you can see looking at our panel here today. But I think the diversity here brings a lot of really varied perspectives, which makes our community a more interesting and vibrant place to be. I love the diversity of buildings and architecture. In my neighborhood, we have duplexes and apartments next to single family homes, and it makes it a really beautiful place to go on a walk or a bike ride. Very visually interesting and just feels inviting. And most importantly, the proximity to amenities here, that I can walk to grocery stores, parks, and restaurants. I'm close to jobs, I'm close to transit. I moved to this area so that I could sell my car and become a bike commuter. So being here offers a lot of opportunity. And that for me really connects to the American dream. I mean, so much of the time today we hear about the American dream and it's equated to purchasing a home. But I recently came across the origins of that phrase. The author who coined the term was writing about how access to opportunity is what sets America apart. He writes, "The American dream is a dream of being able to grow to one's fullest development, unhampered by barriers which were developed for the benefit of classes rather than for the simple human being of any and every class." And right now in Denver, housing costs are forcing people to leave communities of their choice. They're forcing people to leave the city as a whole. And the group living amendments provides an opportunity for people to have access to all of the great things in our neighborhood and in our community. And, you know, connecting it even more to the specific things in the group living amendments, deciding who can live together, having more people be able to live in the same place will help us share our neighborhood with younger people, people who are underpaid, and add their perspectives to our community. In the last apartment I lived in, I was violating the code. There were 5 of us living in a house. We were all in our 30s at the time. I was a flight attendant, and my roommates were a school librarian, a 4th grade teacher, a personal trainer, and a tech worker. That being said, I knew my neighbors, I knew my grocers and my barista. And even though I was violating the code, I was a member of my community. And at that time in my life, I needed to engage in a group living situation in order to afford my home. So I'm really grateful for the American dream of opportunity that I was afforded by living in that community. As for the congregate living piece and sort of encompassing different supportive living situations, I know that this issue is contentious and it hits people really close to home and in their hearts. But I just want to say that in all of our neighborhoods and communities, we have people who are dealing with a variety of challenges, and we share a responsibility with all of the other neighborhoods in the city to provide support for people who are dealing with hardships. And I think it's really important to view these issues with a long-term lens and to try to mitigate the challenges by reducing the othering or the exclusion of people with different needs. I really appreciate the opportunity to share my perspective on these issues, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Great. Thank you for your perspective. Amy, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you and good evening. I'm going to keep my comments very brief, simply because I probably have more of rhetorical questions to ask than I do comments to make regarding this. So I'm Amy Duclos. I live in D10. I have 2 children in Denver Public Schools, one in a middle school and one in high school. And I'm also the education chair for Denver's Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation. Although these comments are not sanctioned by or endorsed by the INC, I'm speaking as a private citizen and really as a parent. My children's schools are packed. And I think that is what many parents across the district are experiencing. And one of my concerns as a mother and as a parent is to think about what this impact could potentially have on our school system if group living happens, there aren't any specific metrics that anybody could actually point to, that it's very difficult to forecast or project how many people could live in which neighborhoods and what homes. And I'm not entirely convinced that Denver Public Schools would have the ability to accommodate a huge spike in those numbers. We're already very full, with class sizes hovering in the low to sometimes mid 30s. The Denver Classroom Teachers Association cap on class sizes in their contract is 35 kids. And I can already speak to kids or speak to classes that are bigger than that in the district. The other concern that I have is, I mean, using like East High School as an example, I mean, I'm not sure that it's still happening today, but there were reports of people renting apartments or renting rooms in Capitol Hill so that their kids could go to East. And what I wonder about is if this group living amendment passes, then then there is no restriction on doing that anymore. So what then will happen to some of those high demand schools, you know, in places like that? So I think for me, the American dream was very different when I was in my 20s, when I lived in Capitol Hill at the time. But now I'm in a different neighborhood with kids with a different set of considerations. So I just hope that Denver Public Schools and the city of Denver, you know, can come together, or at least that facet of this discussion is being considered.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you for your comments. And yes, so I'm trying to keep my opinions out of it. So I you know, really, this isn't a time for me to share my opinions. This is a time to hear yours. So so thank you very much. So we have our first poll. So Teresa, do you want to put up the poll? So what we'll do is we'll put up a poll using the Facebook function. Oh, there, I see it. Hopefully you do too. And this is an opportunity for you to so we want to do this twice. We want to first do this poll, which is kind of just a snap by, you know, opinion based on what you just heard. And then again, we'll follow up probably next week with a different poll to get different ideas. So you don't have to commit 100% to your, you know, to tonight's vote, to this kind of snap poll, so to speak. But we'll leave it up for about 3 minutes, and then we'll move to the next question. Actually, we have 77% of the people have already voted. So maybe we won't need 3 minutes. %83 participation so far. Should have thought of like elevator music. Girl from Ipanema or something. Da, 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 da. Stand by. There was a comment about how the poll isn't showing up on Facebook. I apologize for those participating via Facebook. The poll is in Zoom, and so the snap polls you won't have the opportunity to participate in, but looks like we either have 100% participation or someone stopped the poll. So we have 100% now. So thank you so much for participating. I guess, should I mention the poll results? So majority of people, 54% of the people responded with me and someone I'm related to. So the next most common response, 25% of the rest of you, well, 25% of all of us said me and 2 more people I'm related to. So third place was just me at 10%. So that's 89%, the remaining 11%, 6% me and someone I'm not related to, 3% me and 2 people or more people I'm not related to, and 3% me and a combo of more than 2 relatives or unrelated people. So thank you for participating. I'm gonna do a screenshot. And I will post that to, oh, I won't post it to Facebook. Well, all right. Well, apparently I can't post it to Facebook, but we will save that for later. Uh, this is the fun part of using new technology for the first time. So the next question, the second topic that we want to cover is equity and property values. So moving my notes over again, the ability to build the kind of equity we see in homeownership today is much more challenging for those who haven't bought their first home yet. I'm interested in learning about new tools to help folks break into the ownership market, if that's what they want, as well as ways other folks can protect their investments now and into the future. So that people can live affordably at every stage of life. So we have two people to talk about equity and property values. We have Peter Cooper, and then we have Dmitry Zavratny, I think. But if I've mangled his last name, I'm sure I should have learned to pronounce it correctly before I got to this point in the presentation. So Peter Cooper, are you here? Oh, yeah, you are. Okay. Please take it away.
Peter, we need to have you
Yes,
unmute.
I'm assuming you can hear me. In the presentation that I ended up submitting to Chris Hinds and others back in early July, our first focus was really on, from all that I could determine in the reading that I had done of that which Andrew Webb and his staff had put together, I couldn't see a well-developed impact study. And the need for an impact study, from my perspective, ends up primarily being seeing what are the positive impacts of this proposal and what are the potential negatives. And one negative, well, several negatives that we ended up bringing up, but one ended up being the value of housing in the area where you might end up having communal living. And what we were suggesting is that there's a likelihood of house prices increasing in value where you do have the communal dwellings. And this would have the opposite effect of that intended, as we understood it from what was being put together. If a resident is constructed or converted in which 5 or more unrelated people occupy, the cumulative rent or mortgage could be much higher than if only 2 people were residents. The cost per individual would certainly be less and thus more affordable. But the amount the 5+ people could pay would be much higher than 2 people. The result would be higher housing prices and property values and taxes. Now, in our RNO, which is a very small group, we had 2 members, one who have seen such a proposal as Andrew's been putting together, one in Sydney, Australia, in which this did happen. Another individual had seen a similar thing in both London, England, and Dublin, Ireland. Now, I ended up putting together a couple of examples, which I can run through if you're interested in. But I have to click on Excel. I don't know what that impact has relative to your vision of me, which is just fine if you don't see me, or whether you can actually see the Excel spreadsheet. But I'll pull it up and then I'll keep on babbling to give you a bit of an understanding of where I was coming from this. I have 2 cases. One is if you ended up having a house constructed or had a value of approximately $750,000, and if you had a 30-year mortgage at 3.75%, the payments would equate to $3,473 per month. The renter, if we go on the assumption that the renter only pays $500 a month rather than the $3,475, then a house that I'm suggesting you could acquire a house or build a house of that value, $750,000, that would have 3,200 square feet. Now, this plan, as proposed, would allow up to 10 unrelated residents to live in that house. And their total rent would be $5,000 per month. Okay, so just going quickly again, the landlord would be paying a mortgage of $3,473 per month, and yet he would end up getting a total rent of $5,000. Well, that's a 44% profit per month for the landlord. Not a bad turnaround. And what I'm, from all my experience, certainly in commercial and residential, that one could see the value of that property increasing quite considerably because of the worth of it, and that in fact taxes would increase. And that's not what the intended consequences of this proposal was. Now I have a second case study. Let's take a house that's only $400,000.
Mr. Cooper?
Yes.
We're actually a couple minutes over the 3 minutes already.
All right, that's no problem.
Save the second example. Should we have more time at the end?
No, there's no problem. I mean, you get the same picture.
Okay, great, wonderful, thank you. And thank you for your comments and for the financial analysis. I've been an MBA in finance, so I like numbers. So next, Dimitri, I would like to get your perspective. Please take it away.
Sure. My name is Dimitri Zavarotny. I live in North Capitol Hill. And yeah, so I'm going to talk about group living strictly through building equity and property value lens. So just I'm going to throw out some numbers first. Denver was among the top markets for home price gains during the 2010s, with prices more than doubling according to the Denver Business Journal article from last year. And data by Realtor.com shows that home prices are still rising despite the pandemic. So right now, the median list price for a home is roughly $490,000. And this is as of September 10th, 2020. And then according to Redfin, the median home price increased 109% from $203,000 roughly at the start of 2010 to $424,000 at the end of 2019. That's a lot of numbers. So just to recap, we went from roughly 203 10 years ago to 489, and that's a huge increase, right? Denver's cost of living is actually 12% higher than the national average. And housing is actually the biggest single factor of that cost of living. And then meanwhile, according to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics from May of last year, the mean annual wage was only $62,000 a year in the Denver, Aurora, Lakewood metropolitan statistical area. So if home prices increased by more than $220,000 in 10 years, which is more than double what they were, there's just no way wages can keep up with this. And so this may be great for folks that already own a home and have built equity, but anyone looking to buy a home, there's just no such thing as a starter home in Denver anymore. So if you do the math, you'll see that people like young people, single mothers, teachers, service workers, and anyone not making significantly above the median income level is effectively priced out of Denver. And I just want to throw out a quote by Megan Gorman from a Forbes article called "How Millennials Are Revolutionizing the Home Buying Process" that sort of drives this even further. So in 1970, the average age of a first-time home buyer was 25, as opposed to now with the average age being 34. Millennials are having to wait significantly longer to make their first real estate investment. One observer of the current scene explains it quite simply as a perfect storm. While research suggests millennials are even more interested in buying homes than their parents, they're slower to buy due to a set of financial challenges which include insecure career paths coupled with lack of high-paying jobs and excessive student loan and credit card debt. And as a consequence, the inability to save up for a down payment. Add to that the fact that wages have been pretty stagnant on average over the last 15 years, all the while the cost of living, education, and housing has skyrocketed. You have this perfect storm. And so as a millennial, I prefer to live close to work. That's why I live in this neighborhood. And I want to limit or eliminate driving due to costs and environmental concerns. And I want to be close to all the amenities that Denver has to offer, such as great parks, restaurants, and bike lanes. I just, I got lucky, but there really aren't a whole lot of affordable options. And I bought in this area a couple of years ago. There are really no options, especially if you want to build equity rather than rent. And group living, isn't it's not going to solve this issue. It's going to be a step in the right direction, though, right? It's going to allow people that are perhaps already living in this way or have done it as a means of necessity. It allowed them to do this legally. And it allow certain folks, such as teachers and service workers, to get a foothold in this housing market and actually be able to build equity and move on up. So it's just going to nudge the needle in the right direction. Allowing something to happen does not necessarily mean it's just going to open the floodgates and it's going to happen everywhere. It'll just provide people that opportunity and give people more options. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much. All right. So Teresa, is now the time for the second poll. We're about 64% of the people voted. We're up to 70% now, right? And back down to 69%. That's interesting. Okay, continue to go north. It's at 75% now. So thank you so much for your participation. All right, 88% of you have voted. Great. All right, well, let's see. So the number one response. And by the way, the poll is, we found a way to share the poll on Facebook. So I am going to do that quickly. So I take a screenshot and one of our team will share it in Facebook. So this was a multiple choice, pick 3. The top result was single family home ownership. And I think I can actually, oh, someone has already chosen to share the results. Great. So people are doing things so that I don't have to. The next most common response was higher education as a means to a better job, which was 55% of you. The third was condominium, duplex, triplex home ownership. And because there were several different poll options, I think that you can read through. I think we're able to post this to Facebook too, so I won't cover all of them. But thank you again for participating. Also, one comment, we heard someone say that there was no co-buy with friends option, and we will correct that. We'll make sure that that is an option for the survey that we send out next week. So thank you. The third topic is healthy and safe community character. So we hear a lot of concerns about how we regulate land use as a means to positively, and concerns about negatively impacting the health and safety of our community. We hear about how group living situations create a new kind of family security where people watch out for one another. We also hear from people who are very worried that unrelated people living together seems unsafe, or that unrelated people together may not take care of their living space as much as a family that's maybe a more traditional nuclear relationship. So we have 2 people to talk about this topic, Sarah Wells and Anna Mccaffrey. And excuse me. Oh yeah, I'm reading the right. See, this is what we get when we put it all together very quickly. So thank you so much for your indulgence. So Sarah Wells and Anna Mccaffrey. Sarah, please take it away.
Thanks, Chris. My name's Sarah Wells. I live in Capitol Hill in a cooperative house. In the last several years of advocating for community housing, I've heard a refrain of concerns for things that might happen as a result of these changes. Parking issues, noise concerns, fire safety, and increased crime being chief among them. I will start by affirming to our audience that there is no evidence from our sister cities who have implemented similar changes that group living increases these problems. And I will continue by saying that legislating the kinds of people who can live together is not the way to prevent nuisances or safety issues. Participating in the more than 2-year process of developing these plans, the Group Living Advisory Committee took great care in identifying the ways in which our various codes are written to interact with each other. Safe sleeping areas and habitable rooms are addressed in the building code. Overcrowding and fire safety are addressed in the fire code. Denver has a separate ordinance for noise violations. We already have rules about what you can store on your lawn, making sure your fence is in good repair, and how tall your grass is allowed to be. Why then would we use a rule about familial relationship to protect against these perceived potential issues? In consideration of safety and neighborhood character, I'd like to offer some examples of the lived experience from my cooperative house, a single family home that contains more than 2 unrelated adults, a home that is vulnerable in our current code. Our home, like many cooperatives, is based around sharing. We share cars with one another to limit our environmental impact and reduce parking needs. We cook meals for each other and converse over dinner, increasing our connection to and support for each other. Sometimes those meals are made with vegetables from our giant food garden, a project that would not have been possible for my husband and I to build alone. We participate in quarterly work days, working on home maintenance and renovation projects. I am proud to report that our historic Denver Square is more cared for now than it was by the single family of 7 that inhabited it before us. My housemates regularly offer to watch my infant son. If it were not for their support, I would not be able to participate here tonight. There are dozens of cooperatives across the city that operate as ours does, in supportive, generative ways that foster connection and care. We don't hear about them as often as we hear about occasional bad actors because no one calls in to complain about them, and because declaring their existence makes them vulnerable to losing their housing. Instead, those neighbors benefit from the increased safety that comes from more pedestrian traffic, the decreased burglaries that come from having a house full of people, and maybe a basket of zucchini in August when our gardens are overflowing. The character of our neighborhoods should include all kinds of connected, engaged, and thoughtful folks, even if they happen to live together in a house and be related by their mutual care for their neighborhood and not by blood. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So next, Anna Mccaffrey. Oh, there she is.
Hi, thank you for letting me speak this evening. I'm Anna Mccaffrey and I live in Congress Park. I've lived in my home for 17 years. I moved back to Colorado in 2003, but I am a Denver native. I've lived out of state long enough to know what living conditions we don't want here. I work with low income and underprivileged citizens every single day, and I know what their needs are and what we need to help them with. The health and safety of our community is threatened by this group living proposal. Think about this. An inequitable process leads to inequitable outcomes. First, we must consider safety. The buffer zones will be removed and the floodgates to unsafe neighborhoods will be opened. The collateral consequences of poor planning and the execution of unbridled group living will make our current neighborhoods unsafe. And trust me, I know. I lived next to a group living home who turned their garage into a strip club that opened up every night when the bars closed. There were 20 people coming and going from that house constantly. Children and seniors have been forgotten. Both groups have been minimized and not taken seriously in this process. Safety is getting to and from school without fear of the unknown. Safety is knowing your neighbors. Seniors living next door to a revolving group who do not know them will be compromised and afraid. The ability to get medical and daily care services when access to their property is removed by overcrowding will make it impossible for seniors to safely age in place. This kind of disrespect is just unacceptable. We cannot get back the safety for either of those groups that will be stolen by an inequitable rezoning plan. Next, we must look at health. Our existing infrastructure can't handle the overcrowding, leading to inadequate refuse management and leading to unsanitary conditions. 50 to 100-year-old plumbing was not meant to service households of 20 to 40 people. In addition to all of this, there's no guarantee of affordable housing. Rent will not be controlled. We will have overcrowded, unsafe, unhealthy living at even higher rates. And enforcement, our ability to ensure that the code is followed is hampered by the lack of sufficient resources to address complaints. Residents now have expressed their frustration with the planning board with the current level of enforcement over violations, including, but not exclusive to, parking, weeds, trash, noise, and snow removal. There is no plan to add additional staff or new tools for safety and healthy living. This plan will not work and must be pulled apart to examine what may possibly be done to make it truly equitable, safe, and healthy for our wonderful Denver neighborhoods. Think about this. An inequitable process leads to inequitable outcomes. And this process has been inequitable from the very beginning. Thank you.
Thank you for your perspective. It is time for our next poll, our third poll. And while we're taking our poll, I'll mention that someone mentioned in the chat that we have no people of color on this panel. That is certainly something that we could work on. I would say District 10 is 82% white. So we worked for an inclusive panel based on what our district is today. Certainly there is a school of thought that should say we should ensure that we have a panel that represents who we want to be. But certainly, you know, District 10 is a very white district. So for those watching the recording or participating, the panel is not perfect, but maybe we could have worked a little bit harder. I would say that this is.
Can I mention? I know that I don't think that you can really tell exactly who anyone is because I am not white. So please don't say that everyone on the panel is white.
There's something else I could work on too.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of assumptions of what someone's background is by their name or the way they look or whatever. And I'm a Denver native and grew up right here in Congress Park.
I apologize. Thank you for having me eat crow about how I didn't properly eat crow. So.
Well, no, it's all right. But I think that we have a lot of people that have been underrepresented, but I don't think that you can, at the face of things, just assume who you're talking to all the time.
Absolutely fair. I would say we did strive for a diverse representation as far as the neighborhoods. We had we have every statistical neighborhood represented in District 10, except for Spear. And the Spear neighborhood, we have a portion of. We have the neighborhood, the Alamo Placida neighborhood, but the majority of Spear residents don't live in District 10. So, but every other district, or excuse me, every other neighborhood in our district is represented on this panel. We're up to 80% of people voted. All right, great. So the number, actually, let me make sure that I can share this over to Facebook. The number one response was parking. 69% of you said parking. That is not the first time I've heard parking as an answer. The second response, 63% of you said lack of enforcement for existing rules, parking, trash, maintenance, noise, crime. And also 63% of you, was a tie. Also 63% of you said the parameters to decide how many is too many. So since we've ironed out the details, and I think that this poll is visible for people in Zoom, also for people on Facebook, I did want to read a little bit in case you are watching a recording of Zoom, because this poll wouldn't be available to you in that format. But at least you get the greatest hits, so to speak. Our next topic is, and the final topic before we go into questions and answers, which we should have a little bit of time for, is who should get to live together. So this is discussion around refining who gets to live together, how many people should get to live together. It's a very sensitive topic. Obviously, all of these are very sensitive, and they have a lot of implications. And this is really what we hear the most concern and frustration about. So we have two panelists for this, Anna Dewitt and Michael Henry. So Anna, take it away.
Hey everybody, I'm Anna Dewitt, a Denver teacher and active housing and education activist. Thank you guys so much for having me, for coming today. I've lived in Denver for 8 years and in D10, specifically Congress Park, for 6. I didn't realize at the time, but I've lived in the past illegally in Denver for 3 years. I had 2 roommates in a 1-bedroom house. Yeah, that's right. 3 adults living in a 1-bedroom place. We did it because we were super broke, and it worked because we were never home and always at work. I personally have been very interested in the group living amendment because I feel strongly that this would instantly support the working class and give many Denver residents more housing options. But the question is, who should get to live together? The answer in the year 2020, both legally and morally, is anyone who wants to, within the legal maximum occupancy limits. I assume people listening in right now agree that people should be allowed to love, marry, and live with whomever they want. A 63-year-old Denver native who was also born in a society where it was illegal, certain people and generations were born in a society where it was illegal for a Black man to marry a white woman. This is called the right of association, and we've progressed far from where we were when this law was written. Imagine that for a moment and ask yourself, why are we fighting to keep similar laws from that era? I assume many people listening in also agree that single parents struggling to make ends meet should be allowed to live together in a way that was non-traditional in the 1950s. This will not lead to chaos. Luckily, we have decades-long examples in the largest state in the country. California stopped trying to define who was a proper family 40 years ago, and it has not led to any of the horrible problems predicted by our opponents. So where is this commotion about group living coming from? I think people are scared. People have heard their property values will decrease. Not true. California property values, and again, a place that's done away with this law, is higher than ever. People have heard that their home next to them will allow 20+ people to live there. And yes, if the house is large enough, that is true. But the funny part is that's true now. That's true today. Under today's law, 20+ related people can live right next to you, but they don't because no one wants to live in that way. People have heard that criminals will be their neighbors. Also not true. If this amendment passes, halfway homes still must go through state and federal law in order to exist. Denver can pass any progressive housing bill it wants to, yet it would do little to allow more halfway homes due to strict state and federal law regulations. I've heard people say that they fear this amendment would max out our schools. And I did hear this tonight. Amy, thank you for being here. I do love working with you. But this isn't necessarily true. Almost every single school in DPS and every elementary school in D10 has a projected decrease in enrollment. And this was before COVID. D10 needs more families with children living here. I would also like to include that the governing body of the teachers union voted to support the group living amendment. That's 4,000 people in Denver because they are committed to living in a more inclusive and affordable Denver. It's hard to teach students who are housing insecure, and unfortunately, that's the reality of many DPS students. And yes, class sizes are too high, but that doesn't have anything to do with enrollment. That has to do with how DPS is allocating money to their schools. At a time when DPS is experiencing massive budget cuts, more students in our schools equals more funding to our schools. But again, back to the prompt, who should live together? Do you think the city of Denver has a right to tell law-abiding people how they should live? In a world where blended families, co-parenting, gay marriage, and single parenthood is the norm, I think we should give another look at what does it mean to be a family? I think we should take a strong look at our individual actions and ask ourselves, are we on the right side of history? Or do we support outdated living systems from the 1950s? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Henry, call me Michael. Are you ready? And you are currently muted. There we go.
There I am.
Take it away, sir.
Just a very quick introduction. I used to be the president of Capitol Hill United Neighborhoods, and I'm also a past president of Inter-Neighborhood Cooperation, the coalition of many registered neighborhood groups throughout the city. Back in the mid-1990s, many of us in Capitol Hill woke up and realized that almost all of the shelters and group homes and community corrections facilities were located in a very small number of neighborhoods, namely Capitol Hill, Congress Park, downtown, the industrial areas, and Northwest Denver. My guess is that hardly anybody even knows that within District 10, there are a couple of community corrections facilities already, and nobody even knows they're there. They're very well regulated by the feds, the state, and the city. The question at the moment is who should get to live together? That implies that somebody should decide who gets to live with each other. And as Anna spoke eloquently just a minute ago, we're not in that age anymore where people need to decide who gets to live together. One of the principles that the Group Living Committee, which I did serve on with Sarah and one other District 10 neighborhood person, was that whatever the rules adopted are need to be enforceable. And one of the very first things we agreed upon is that we don't want the city or anybody going into people's housing and taking DNA tests or figuring out how many related or unrelated people live here. That's just not practical or sensible. The comprehensive plan 2040 says that Denver should be an equitable, inclusive community with a high quality of life for all residents. I served a very long time ago on the Comprehensive Plan Committee back in 1988. And the basic principle of that whole document is what I hearken back to many times. It says the same thing a little bit better, I think. We should be a city that is livable for all of its residents. The Group Living Committee worked for 2.5 years. We did a lot of compromising. We listened very carefully to the public meetings that were very well attended in February, and considerably compromised and adjusted the plan in view of all of the public input. And I'm sure, Chris, that you're going to get a lot more public input. Council is, and there will be some more adjustments. But it's a very important principle to update the old 1995 ordinances and make them more equitable for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. All right, well, we have the survey, a question about it, and I neglected to tease Brian Connolly. He will, after we do this last question, he will give a short presentation, at most 5 minutes, about the Fair Housing Act and national trends. And I'm happy to be here as long as people want to ask questions. But just so you know, I haven't forgotten about the Q&A portion. So thank you.
We actually we don't have any other polls. So we're good to go.
We're done with polls.
Ready to talk.
Who needs polls? Thank you for all of your participation in the previous polls. That was the point of that poll part, right? So how about, where did Brian go? Oh, there he is.
I'm here.
Great. So go nuts. I mean, take it away, sir.
Thank you, Councilman, and I appreciate you inviting me to participate in this discussion. Good evening. I am Brian Connolly. I am a land use planner and a land use lawyer. with the law firm of Otten, Johnson, Robinson, Neff, and Raganetti. We are a Denver-based law firm, and one of the areas in which we practice is land use. And in addition to that, I teach land use law at both the University of Colorado and University of Denver law schools. I've done a lot of work on issues of group living and land use, representing providers of group living as well as local governments that deal with issues related to group living. And I'm also the lead co-author of the American Bar Association's primary book on group living issues, which is called Group Homes, Strategies for Effective and Defensible Planning and Regulation. Although I'm not a resident of District 10, I work throughout Denver and the state on these issues, so I'm happy to provide some comment. I did agree to participate in this under one condition, which is that I'm not taking a position on the group living amendment, perhaps unlike others you've heard this evening, but I've been asked to provide some legal context for the discussion. So I'll take everyone back to the early 1900s when local governments began to engage in zoning, and one of the most common features of zoning that we saw was single-family zoning. Creating single-family zoning required local governments to come up with a definition of what a family is. And so beginning, about 100 years ago, we started to see local governments begin to regulate housing units based on who was living in them. Those family definitions focused on the relatedness of the parties that were living together. And so that started to look a lot like what we have today in Denver. We allow any number of people related by blood marriage or adoption to reside together, or up to a defined number of unrelated people. That type of regulation was brought before the US Supreme Court much later in 1974, which confirmed that regulating on the basis of familial relationships was lawful as a matter of constitutional law. And that case involved a small town on Long Island located near a college, which basically tried to get rid of students in single-family zoning districts, a common feature of family-based zoning, by limiting the total number of unrelated people who could live together in a single home. And that case went up to the Supreme Court. It was essentially a right to privacy issue, and the Supreme Court determined that it was constitutional for local governments to zone on the basis of familial relationship and require single-family districts to truly be family districts in terms of the relatedness of the parties living in a given housing unit. At the same time, right around that same year, in fact, the federal government, Congress passed the Rehabilitation Act, which prohibited discrimination against people with disabilities in federal programs. And then subsequently, the Fair Housing Act was amended in 1988 to add protection for people with disabilities, and that guarantees effectively that people with disabilities will not be discriminated against in both the acquisition of housing as well as in their residence in any housing unit. And then after that, we had the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in the early 1990s, providing protection to people with disabilities in places of public accommodation and in other settings as well. The definition of disability that we find in those federal laws, the Rehabilitation Act, the Fair Housing Act, and the ADA, is actually quite broad. So it includes people with physical disabilities, including disabilities relating to mobility, perhaps hearing or sight, and which actually captures many elderly people, would be classified as people with disabilities. It also includes people with cognitive disabilities, including mental illness or other forms of learning disability. And then also it includes people recovering from addiction, whether drug or alcohol addiction, people with HIV and AIDS, and some other groups as well. And so that being said, the definition of people with disabilities under those laws does not generally include people who maybe were formerly incarcerated or who are homeless, although there's often significant overlap between those groups and people with disabilities. So along with the adoption of the Fair Housing Act and the ADA came a requirement that local governments provide reasonable accommodations. And so that means that in addition, actually local governments and private landlords and HOAs were required to modify their rules, and that includes zoning rules, in order to give people with disabilities an opportunity to use and enjoy a dwelling on the same basis as non-disabled people. So where a person's disability necessitates living in a group setting in order for the person to live in, say, a residential neighborhood, he or she has a legal right to reside in that group setting in a residential neighborhood. And the Supreme Court addressed that issue in 1995 and determined that the Fair Housing Act actually prohibits a local government from using restrictive family definitions to block people with disabilities from living in residential neighborhoods. So basically allowing people, groups of people with disabilities to live together has been a requirement of federal law since at least 1988. And so in light of that requirement and then other changes and challenges, that includes changing family structures. The American family looks very different now than it did in the 1920s or 1950s. Affordability challenges, the advent of group living as a therapeutic response to other conditions like past incarceration, and then also in response to state law in some places, although not here, we've seen several local governments adopt changed definitions of family, or in fact move away from definitions of family as it relates to residential housing units. And those that have moved away from family have basically eliminated definitions that focus on the relatedness of individuals in the household and instead focus on whether a group of people is essentially a single housekeeping unit. So that could mean that they have shared facilities, say a shared kitchen, shared bathroom, shared living areas. It could mean that they share household responsibilities, such as cooking and cleaning. And it also may focus on the legal relationship between people who reside in a given unit. Say, do they share a lease or do they have separate leases in a particular residential unit? And so those local governments that have changed their definitions of family have also recognized that virtually all of the negative externalities that many people associate, whether correctly or incorrectly, with group living, and that might include poor property maintenance, overabundance of cars, excessive noise, criminal activity. Those local governments recognize that those issues can be controlled effectively through both zoning enforcement and effective policing. Or they can be controlled, safety issues can be controlled through building code requirements that address fire safety. And by the way, building codes do actually limit how many people can occupy a dwelling unit based on the physical size of the unit itself. So just as those issues can be controlled through effective enforcement and policing when they occur in non-group living circumstances, as that also may be the case when a large family resides together, for example. So where we're at now from a legal perspective is we have federal law that allows local governments to regulate housing based on the relatedness of people in a housing unit. It requires local governments to make reasonable accommodations for people with disabilities. Some states and local governments have begun to change their definitions of family to basically accommodate single housekeeping units and address some of these other concerns. But then nothing in state or federal law prohibits a local government from regulating the effects, land use effects of a housing unit, or regulating, for example, property maintenance issues. So that's my summary. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And so that wraps up the presentation portion. We do have some questions that have been posed using the Q&A function. Teresa or team, do you have any one that that you think should be asked first? So there are a couple in here that I don't think the full question made it into the Q&A function. There's one anonymous attendee who asked us to, he said, if this anonymous attendee said, if you want to make this an inclusive discussion, please open up chat comments to all attendants. So it's interesting that the person chose to be anonymous. Just so you know, we made that choice because we saw the Citizen Oversight Board and their inclusive process where they made it very inclusive, and there were several hate segments and just deplorable segments there that were because the comments were open and visible to everyone. So we're trying to do our balance to make sure that we are as inclusive and open as possible without offending people unnecessarily. So let's see. So Liz and my team says definitely get to Allison's question, and I don't see Allison's question, so I'm not sure where that is. So if Liz, do you just want to ask the question or point it out?
Sure. It says, Teresa would like to answer this question live. I'm wondering what people suggest we do for those households that are already in violation of group living codes. This is clearly something that is already happening, not something that will happen. Should we be tossing those people out to the street? I guess, what do we do about the current people that are out of compliance?
And maybe that should be directed to Andrew Webb. And actually, I think if while you're answering this question, I think that could you also address the question of whether or not we are enforcing the current rules, and if so, how that enforcement happens?
Sure. So the city does enforce those rules. There are on average there are about 25,000 zoning complaints made in a given year via the 311 system, and about again on average, and it varies widely by year, but there are on average about 195 calls or complaints for this specific issue of unrelated adults, and about 80 of those, or a little less than half, are found to be actual violations of the code in a given year. And the way that they're enforced is that staff goes to the home and asks people for currently for some proof of relationships. And so they can ask for documentation that people are related. Typically, the visit begins with the inspector just simply asking, "Are you all related?" And often people will say no, and it's common that residents weren't aware that this was actually a rule. And so our code enforcement staff will work to bring them into compliance, which in some cases results in people moving out. More recently, I do want to note, and we have a little bit more about this on our project website in the frequently asked questions, but we have just recently issued a department policy to deprioritize this and make this a low priority for enforcement for neighborhood inspection services because of the pandemic and the need for people to maintain stable housing. And so our department, and you can go online and actually read the policy itself, but our inspectors will focus on addressing the external impacts that may be being felt by neighbors, but will not prioritize enforcing number of unrelated adults right now during the pandemic.
Andrew, one of the questions that came in was asking about neighborhoods where Mayor Hancock and some council members live are exempt from the change, and they refer to Chapter 59. Could you explain like the difference between a text amendment and a specific zone lot amendment as it relates to this?
Of course, yeah. So this is a text amendment to a set of regulations in the Denver zoning code, which is the current code, which, as you said, Teresa, it covers about 80% of the city. There are some areas of the city that, when the new code or the current code was adopted in 2010, had either customized zoning or undeveloped land with vested property rights, where there was not a clear analog in the new code that would match the old code zoning, the former Chapter 59, we call it code zoning. And so the CPD has been working methodically since 2010 to rezone those areas, which is a different thing, actually changing the zoning of property to the new code, and with the goal of eventually bringing all properties into the new code and retiring former Chapter 59. We certainly hear, as we've done more text amendments over the years, which are essentially a global change to the regulations in the zoning code. As we've done more of these over the years, it has really highlighted the inequity between the current code and the 1956 code. And we hear the concern about some of those areas in former Chapter 59, which include Green Valley Ranch and parts of Lowry, parts of Central Park, and other areas of the city, primarily on the east side of the city, but certainly in other parts as well. And so we are actually, in response to the feedback we've gotten about this concern that 20% of the city would not be impacted by these amendments, we're actually looking at some options for potentially a concurrent change that would essentially bridge the proposed household regulations, however they end up ultimately amended through the council's legislative review process, to make sure that we're looking at ways to ensure that those would apply in former Chapter 59 areas as well. And we'll keep the city council updated with more information on that as it develops.
This next one might be for Andrew, but maybe also for Brian. Can a group of homes that form an HOA include restrictions in their covenants that are more strict than a local government zoning? For example, can an HOA base occupancy rules on the number of residents per bedroom?
I can answer that from the perspective of the zoning code, which does in the Article 1 of the code acknowledges that where there are conflicting regulations, if another entity enforces its own regulations, like an HOA, and has more restrictive regulations, then that is possible. I compare it to pets. The code allows up to 5 pets in a home, 3 dogs and 2 cats. And an HOA and commonly will say, you can't have more than 2 pets or something like that. And the city doesn't enforce HOA regulations, but an HOA, just like a landlord or property owner, can have their own regulations if they choose to.
Just to be clear, the pets was just pets. We're not trying to say that people with black rules are animals, right? So
just thinking of an analogous regulation in the code that would apply there. And I would also highlight that the city currently, as Brian noted, we are bound to the requirements of the Fair Housing Act and also the Colorado Group Home Statute, and already does accommodate residential care uses in all zone districts. And there are currently about 60 residential care uses that exist in neighborhoods, and that essentially wouldn't change as a part of this. These changes essentially preserve, in a lot of ways, preserve regulations that currently exist.
Thank you. Another question that we had is, do we get a poll to see if we are for or against the proposal? We do intend to submit a follow-up survey, and that will likely be one of the questions. I want to also, part of the reason why we're not going to send it immediately is because we want to make sure that we are as unbiased with the questions that we ask as possible. Likely another question that we might have is just create a range of numbers between 2 and 10 or more, and say, do you feel comfortable with this number, just to get a sense. So we haven't figured out exactly what those questions will be, and that's the main reason why we're delaying until next week, because we want to make sure that we create survey questions where we can actually get answers, or actually make decisions, as opposed to trying to ask leading questions through the survey.
We understand that. So here's another question. Councilman Hinds, this is for you. There was an opinion piece in the Denver Post today by a few fellow council members, and they're wondering if you were asked to sign on to that piece, and if you agree or disagree.
So I was not contacted by either of the authors. So I did get advance notice that there was an op-ed that was under consideration. I also had another, the person who told me that also offered a second question at the same time. The second question was, here is a list of concerns. Do those do the concerns from neighborhood organizations and neighbors in your district, are those encapsulated in this list? And so I went and did more research on the second question, and I didn't know the timing of the first question. So I'm not a signatory on the op-ed, partly because neither of the authors actually reached out. So, and I didn't know the timing. I would say I think this is no surprise to Mr. Webb. There was a majority of us on council who wrote an email to him back in April, I think early April, and said, please, now that COVID is upon us, please make sure that we are having a robust discussion, and we did specifically ask for the process to slow down. I would say part of the calculation that I had when I chose whether I would or would not be an author on that letter was I looked at the East Central Area Plan and its timeline, which was entirely outside of COVID at that point, and compared it to the group living plan, and the East Central Area Plan had at least 6 more months of deliberation before it had reached the same point. So that was another data point that I had when I thought, when I considered joining that letter. And I did ultimately join the letter. And I think that even the people who are in firm favor and in firm opposition, I think that all of them can understand and appreciate a robust conversation. I would say we're also at risk. If we totally shut this down, if council votes it down, then we're also at risk, because I think a lot of people see some really good stuff. I agree with Travis Leiker, who presented the for Chun. This isn't perfect. There are good things. There are things that I would not, I don't agree with. So, but if we vote it down, we have, we're throwing out the bathwater and the baby, and I'm really concerned about, taking away some of the good parts of this proposal. So I firmly believe that we should have additional conversation. Part of my biggest sticking point is that we didn't have a district-wide conversation. So we're having that now. I also understand that some people feel that the sandwich is made, so to speak, that the proposal is what it is and that we won't have any opportunity to change it. And I hope that is not the case, because that would lead us back to that same conclusion where we would have to vote on something as it is. And I'm not sure that that's a great position for council to be in. So that's quite a bit longer answer, and it goes beyond kind of what you asked for, but I think that still is in the spirit of the question that you asked.
This question might be for Sarah. If there she is, she's still on. Does Fannie Mae financing allow for multiple unrelated homeowners to be on one mortgage? What types of financing is there for these types of group living homes, or does one person hold the ownership and mortgage and others just rent? What does this say for spreading the home equity increase anticipated?
Yeah, I can answer that. So Fannie Mae and conventional loans actually don't have a limit to the number of people that are allowed to be on the mortgage. Most mortgage lenders work with up to 4, but there technically is not a limit. There's also not a limit to the number of people that can be on title for a home. Most mortgage brokers, when they're going through the financing process, don't actually look at municipal zoning laws when approving people for home ownership. And so there's that. And you can have any number of people on title. There's no limit to the number of people that are able to own a home. In terms of how that manifests in different cooperatives. In our cooperative, we have many members on title for our property as a mechanism for sharing ownership, and also have limited equity agreements that allow people to own a share of the property and benefit from the equity that we're building living in Capitol Hill. And when they leave living with us, then they leave with a significant bit of income for them to use for future home purchases. So for us, it really was about providing affordable housing as a mechanism to also prepare people for that next step in life, and really being able to share the equity that comes with homeownership.
So there's a question, if Denver real estate is unaffordable, why are there so many buyers pushing prices higher? I called, District 10, obviously City Council District 10, I have nicknamed it Denver's Perfect 10. Obviously we live in the real world. We don't live in Narnia. The real world isn't actually perfect, but I really like living here. It's perfect for me. And it's perfect for a lot of people. People want to live here so much that they're willing to live in tents to live in District 10. And I'm not trying, this is a conversation about group living. That is a very sticky conversation as well, but it is a true statement nonetheless. And so so it is unaffordable for the people who are living here today. There are people coming from out of state that are buying places because they are moving to Colorado for the rugged outdoor lifestyle. The largest apartment owner or largest apartment management company in the city of Denver, a lot of their properties are in Capitol Hill and Uptown and Cheeseman, and 40% of their new leases are signed to people who are from out of state. People are coming from all over the nation, sometimes beyond, to the city of Denver, and they're coming to the urban core into District 10 because we are a wonderful place to be. And so we are pricing the people who live here today out, and that's part of the challenge. And so housing, Blueprint Denver is kept in mind that we're anticipating an additional 200,000 people to move to the city of Denver by 2040. That's an additional 30% population gain over what we already have. And so that's what's making us more unaffordable. And it's the people today who are getting priced out who live here today. And that's not okay for the people here today either, right? So that hopefully answers that question.
We have another one about HOAs, and they're related to if HOAs pass rules that discriminate based on family type, can the city make those discriminatory rules illegal? This was done in the past by HOAs and similar entities to exclude Blacks, Jews, etc. And fortunately, this was made illegal. Finally, I'm worried about HOAs thinking they have a new license to discriminate.
So, I don't know that the zoning code doesn't really regulate HOAs, and we can certainly look at what regulations do exist in perhaps the revised municipal code. HOAs, as you just noted, Teresa, and I think as the commenter did too, do have to comply with the federal Fair Housing Act, and so they can no longer discriminate against the groups you mentioned, including protected classes like groups of people with disabilities, that sort of thing. And certainly can also not to discriminate on the basis of family status, like can't discriminate against families with children, for instance, unless the development was built specifically as a senior housing use. But we'll take a look at what latitude the city might have to prevent a layer of exclusion like that. I don't know that I can really answer that knowledgeably now, but it's certainly something we'll take a look at.
Brian, do you think that's something you might be able to speak?
Yeah, sure. I mean, HOAs are largely regulated at the state level by the Colorado Common Interest Ownership Act. And HOAs, as Andrew correctly noted, federal law limits HOAs' ability to engage in discrimination on the basis of any of the protected classes in the Fair Housing Act, which includes race, national origin, also includes familial status and disability. So there are already fairly substantial limitations on HOA's ability to engage in that type of discrimination.
And I want to thank the panelists. We actually were planning to end at 7:30, and we're still going strong. And you are troopers for hanging in there. If maybe we could take one or two more questions and kind of wrap it up around 8. I am happy to stay longer, but I certainly want to be respectful of all the panelists who are still here. So, Teresa, do you have one other question that we could? Sorry,
what constitutes unrelated? What does relationship mean?
So in the zoning code, currently in the Denver zoning code, there is a specific list that includes parents and children and in-laws, and then some terminology that people may not be very familiar with, nibblings, which are nieces and nephews, and parent siblings, which are aunts and uncles. I'm not sure why that language exists the way that way, but that is what it is. What we are proposing is to make that list a little bit less specific and a little bit less outdated by just simply acknowledging anybody who is related by blood or by adoption or by documented responsibility. So that would include foster relationships, adult care relationships, that sort of thing.
So Brian, there was one, I think while you were giving your comments, maybe it was Sarah, are co-ops separate entities under Colorado law? Or are they covered separately? The question isn't phrased in the form of a question, but I think they're trying to make a distinction that co-ops are separate entities under Colorado law. I don't know if anyone has any thought on that.
So a cooperative is different from, for example, a condominium structure. A cooperative structure traditionally is if you are you have a structure where you are effectively a shareholder in a company that owns a piece of property, and by virtue of owning a share in that company, you have a right to occupy a room or a apartment unit or something like that in the building. I mean, I don't know how Sarah's cooperative works, whether it's an ownership structure or if it's a rental structure. I'm sure she can speak to that. That differs, of course, from, for example, a condominium where you have a deeded right to a particular airspace, which includes your unit. And then by virtue of ownership in that unit, you have some common interest in the commonly owned spaces, which could include driveways or grass areas or a deck or patio or something like that.
Awesome. Okay. I think last question. Andrew Webb is still here, and then we're gonna have to wrap it up. What would you speak to the kind of correction facilities that would be allowed, and what safeguards would apply to those facilities? And also, I believe Planning Board had a couple proposed recommendations, and those are recommendations. They haven't been adopted or voted on, but could you cover those as well?
Absolutely. So this is this is the kind of information that's in the much longer presentations I've given and summarized on our website in more depth. But by consolidating residential care uses, we would be allowing for a community corrections facility to exist as in the smallest sizes of residential care, type 1 and type 2. Serving up to 10 people in most settings, and then up to 40 people with a minimum lot size of 12,000 square feet. Community corrections is a use for people that serves people who are still considered to be incarcerated, but are allowed to move into a less structured residential facility where they have the opportunity to get job training and seek employment, can leave to attend family functions, that sort of thing. Right now, they are only allowed in some industrial zone districts in Denver and downtown. And the ones that exist are primarily in industrial districts or abutting some of the city's most underserved neighborhoods. And our take is that to take the most equitable approach to not excluding any particular population, rather than identifying certain types of care and saying these can only go in industrial zones where people don't have access to transit and their other day-to-day needs. Instead, allow all residential care uses where any residential care use is allowed. Community corrections would still be required to meet the requirements of both the Denver Municipal Codes, Chapter 26 regulations on operations and security, and then they would also have to meet the state of Colorado statutes and standards for 24-hour security, that sort of thing. Most of these operate, most existing facilities operate at a much larger scale than at a neighborhood scale, so it's hard to say whether there'd be a market for that, but we know that there is interest in exploring smaller scale, more therapeutic models for community corrections. The planning board, in their deliberations, did highlight a lot of the feedback that people had provided, indicating concern with allowing that particular use in closer to neighborhoods or in neighborhoods. And right now, or as proposed to the planning board, there would not be a public meeting requirement for the smallest size of residential care facility, the type 1s. And the planning board did recommend an amendment that would require that community information meeting in the event that a residential care facility is going to be operated as a community corrections use. And so we are certainly supportive of that and are committed to working with City Council to develop language that adds that requirement when that particular use is proposed in a residential area.
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone who is watching, the hundreds of people who registered and have been participating, the people watching online on Facebook, those who will watch again the recording. I know we do live streams every Friday at 1:30, and we might have a dozen people watching on Friday at 1:30, but we end up getting 500 people watching a week or so later. So watching it live and watching it take delay, as old folks might say, is definitely a thing. So thank you all who are watching. Thank you all for considering group living. Thank you so much, the panelists, for volunteering your time and for participating in this process, and in many cases volunteering your professional knowledge and your specific subject matter expertise. And I want to finally once again thank the team of District 10 for putting this together, because I couldn't have done it without you. So thank you so much. And it is past 8 o'clock. So please have a wonderful rest of your evening and stay safe.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Chris.